You know, sweetheart, when people talk about bravery, they often picture someone standing tall in the middle of a storm. But sometimes bravery is much quieter. It's a whisper against a crowd that's screaming hate. I learned that when I was just 19 years old, back in Brooklyn, 1969. I was a college girl then, full of dreams, wild ideas, and the belief that the world could be kind if only we tried hard enough. Our college stood on Flatbush Avenue, tucked between a row of maple trees and an old bakery that always smelled like cinnamon. It was a beautiful place, but beauty often hides what's ugly underneath. I remember that first morning so vividly. The way the September wind brushed against my hair, the sound of the bell echoing through the courtyard, and the nervous flutter in my stomach. I was new to the campus, still trying to find my rhythm, still figuring out where I belonged. And then I saw her. She was sitting alone on a stone bench near the fountain, tall, with deep brown skin that glowed under the sunlight. Her name was Ava Coleman. She had eyes like midnight water, calm yet heavy, as if they'd seen storms far greater than mine. Everyone else passed by her like she didn't exist. Some stared, some whispered, a few giggled behind their hands. I didn't understand why at first. I walked over and said, "Mind if I sit here?" She looked up surprised, like she wasn't used to someone asking her that. Then she gave a small nod. That's how it began, the simplest act. Sitting beside someone others chose to ignore. We started talking, and by the end of that hour, I realized Ava was brilliant. She wanted to be a journalist. Said she wanted to write truth loud enough that even those who hated would have to listen. Her words stuck to my heart. But, sweetheart, not everyone liked that friendship. The first sign came a week later. We were walking toward the cafeteria when a group of boys blocked our way. All seniors, all white, all smirking like they owned the place. Their leader, a broad-shouldered guy named Rick Dalton, looked Ava up and down and said, "Hey, Coleman, didn't know they started letting charity cases into college." I froze. Ava's face didn't change. She just kept walking. But when we passed them, one of the boys muttered, "Bet she stole someone's scholarship." Something inside me twisted. I turned around and shouted, "Why don't you mind your own business?" Rick's grin faded for a second. Then he laughed and said, "You'll regret picking her side, Blondie." I didn't realize then that it wasn't just a threat. It was a promise. Over the next few weeks, the whispers grew louder. Notes left on my desk. "Nuff, lover." My locker door scratched with the word traitor. My book stolen. My name mocked during lectures. Ava told me to ignore it. She said she was used to it, that she'd been dealing with such hate all her life. But I wasn't used to it. I wasn't built to stay quiet. One evening after classes, I went to the dean's office. His name was Mr. Carter, a tall man with white hair, calm voice, and eyes that carried the weight of years. I told him everything. The bullying, the names, the threats. He sighed, leaned back in his chair and said, "I understand your concern, but these are sensitive times. We don't want to cause division on campus." Sensitive times. That's what they called it when people like Ava were treated like they didn't belong. I walked out of his office feeling smaller than ever. But when I told Ava, she smiled faintly and said, "That's how it always starts." Silence dressed as peace. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the laughter, the whispers, the sound of Ava's calm voice hiding behind walls of pain. I made up my mind. If the world wanted silence, I'd give it noise. So I wrote an article. It was titled, "The Invisible Student." I poured everything into it. What Ava faced, what I witnessed, what no one wanted to admit. I posted it on the student board under my name. By morning, the campus was buzzing. Some praised it, many mocked it. But people were talking. For the first time, they couldn't pretend not to see. Then things got worse. That afternoon, we walked into class, and someone had drawn a big, ugly word across the blackboard. The same word they used to hurt her. Everyone laughed. Ava just stood there staring at it. Then she quietly picked up the eraser and wiped it clean. No tears, no words, just silence. But I saw her hands trembling. Later, when we sat together under the maple trees, she said, "You didn't have to write that article, you know. It's just going to make them hate you too." I said, "Then let them. Maybe they'll get tired before I do." She looked at me for a long time and whispered, "You're not like the rest of them." I didn't know if it was a compliment or a curse. Weeks passed. The bullying didn't stop. It only changed shape. My grades were suddenly questioned. Teachers who once smiled at me began avoiding me. Once I found my dorm door painted over with, "Stay with your own kind." It broke me for a while. I thought about leaving college altogether. But then one night I found Ava sitting on the dorm stairs, reading by candlelight. The power had gone out again. Or maybe someone had cut it off for our floor. I never knew. She looked up and said softly, "If you leave, they win." That night we promised each other we wouldn't back down. We started a small student group, just 5 people at first, who believed in equality and unity. We called it One Voice. We printed small flyers, organized open talks, and began sharing stories of students who'd faced bias, no matter their color. And sweetheart, you won't believe how people reacted. Some spat on our posters, some tore them down, but others quietly slipped notes under our door saying, "Thank you." That's when I realized, for every person who hated, there was someone too scared to speak, but ready to listen. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Thursday, cold, windy, with rain threatening to fall. Ava had a presentation the next morning. She was so excited rehearsing her speech in our dorm room. But when we went to the lecture hall early to set up, we found her project torn apart, papers soaked, paint splattered on her poster board. And on the wall behind it, scrawled in black spray paint, were the words, "Go back to where you belong." Ava stood there for a full minute. Then she sat on the floor and began to cry. I knelt beside her and held her hand. I'd never seen her cry before. It broke something in me. Something I didn't even know was there. I told her, "We're not running anymore." That's when we made our plan. The one that would turn the whole college upside down. You know, sweetheart, courage sounds noble when you talk about it years later. But back then, it felt more like standing barefoot on broken glass. Every step hurt, but I couldn't stop walking. After that night, after I found Ava crying beside her ruined project, something in both of us shifted. We weren't just victims anymore. We were angry, alive, determined. We spent the entire night fixing her project from scratch. I ran across campus to the art room, sneaking supplies while the janitor wasn't looking. Ava repainted her entire presentation board using whatever colors she could find. When dawn came, her hands were blistered and stained. But she stood tall, holding that board like it was her flag. When she walked into the lecture hall, whispers filled the room again. Rick and his gang sat in the back, smirking like they owned the air we breathed. But when Ava started speaking, her voice steady, calm, yet fierce, the room went silent. She spoke about identity, about being seen for who you are rather than what you look like, about history, pain, and hope, about belonging. And when she ended with, "I refuse to apologize for existing," I swear you could hear the echo of her heartbeat in the room. Some clapped. Not many, but some. The professor gave her a hesitant smile. Rick rolled his eyes and muttered something under his breath. But Ava walked out with her chin high, and I followed her out like a soldier behind a general. That was the day she stopped hiding. We knew the risks. We knew they'd hit back harder. So we decided to make our voices louder before they could silence us. We expanded One Voice. It wasn't just 5 people anymore. Soon there were 20, then 30. Students who had been quiet, scared, or simply tired of pretending nothing was wrong. Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, all together. We started holding open discussions on the campus lawn. The first meeting was tense. Half the crowd came to mock us. Some shouted things I don't even want you to repeat, sweetheart. But others listened. Ava spoke with that calm fire of hers, and I learned to find my voice, too. But then the threats started getting darker. One night, when I was leaving the library, I found a note on my bicycle. "Stop this before you end up in the river." I hid it from Ava at first, but she found out anyway. She looked at me and said, "They're scared. That's why they're getting meaner." I wanted to believe her, but then the cafeteria incident happened. It was a Friday right before midterms. The lunchroom was packed. Ava went to get her tray, and I was behind her in line. Suddenly, someone from another table shouted, "Careful! She might dirty the food!" Everyone laughed. Then, a milk carton flew through the air. It hit Ava on the shoulder and spilled all over her white shirt. The room went quiet for a second. I remember the sound of the milk dripping to the floor, the silence heavy as iron. Ava didn't say a word. She turned, eyes cold, scanning the crowd. Then she walked out. I followed her, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. Outside, she leaned against the wall, breathing fast. I could see the anger shaking inside her like a storm. I whispered, "Let's go to the dean again." She laughed bitterly. "To him? He'll probably tell us to stay calm and understand their perspective." And that was it. We stopped waiting for authority. We started becoming it. We organized a peaceful sit-in protest right in front of the main hall. I remember the morning. How the air felt electric. The sound of paper signs fluttering in the wind. "Equality isn't a color," one read. "We belong here too," said another. Dozens of students joined us. Ava sat in the front row, her posture perfect, her hands folded in her lap. I sat beside her, feeling both terrified and proud. Then Rick and his gang showed up. He stood there, arms crossed, surrounded by a few teachers who didn't bother to stop him. "You're making fools of yourselves," he sneered. Ava looked up and said, "Maybe fools are just people who stop being afraid." Rick stepped closer. "You think this will change anything?" She said softly, "It already has." Then, someone threw a can. It hit Ava's arm. The crowd gasped. Before I could react, Rick raised his voice, shouting something ugly, and chaos broke out. Students yelled at each other, some defending us, others calling us troublemakers. I saw security rush in. The dean appeared at the steps, shouting for everyone to calm down. And then, Ava fainted. I caught her before she hit the ground. Her eyes rolled back, her breathing shallow. I screamed for help. They took her to the infirmary. The doctor said it was exhaustion, lack of sleep, stress, dehydration. But I knew it was more than that. It was the weight of hate pressing down until she couldn't stand anymore. When she woke up, I was sitting beside her bed. She looked weak but smiled. "Guess I made an impression." I laughed and cried at the same time. "You scared the life out of me." Then she said something I'll never forget. "Maybe it's worth being hated if it means someone else will be loved tomorrow." Sweetheart, I didn't know then how true those words would become. After that day, things shifted. The protest made headlines in the local paper. Not big ones, just a small column on the 3rd page. But it was enough. People outside the college started noticing. Activists, local groups, even journalists came asking questions. That's when the dean, Mr. Carter, finally called us in again. We sat in his office, facing him across that heavy mahogany desk. His face was pale, tired. "You two have caused quite a stir," he said. I braced myself for punishment, maybe even expulsion. But instead he sighed and said, "You've opened eyes. More than you know?" Ava blinked, unsure if she'd heard him right. He continued, "I should have acted sooner. Maybe I was too afraid of losing peace. But peace built on silence isn't peace at all." Then he stood up and said quietly, "Tomorrow I'll address the college myself." That next morning, the entire campus gathered in the courtyard. The dean stood at the podium, wind rustling his notes. He looked around, his voice trembling at first, but growing stronger with every word. He said every student here deserves respect, every single one. This institution will no longer tolerate hate in any form. And then, to everyone's shock, he turned toward Ava and said, "Miss Coleman, your courage shamed our cowardice. Thank you." There was silence. Then slowly a few claps. Then more, until the courtyard filled with applause. Ava stood beside me, tears in her eyes. I squeezed her hand. That was the first time I saw pride. Not anger, not pain. Pure, rightful pride, shining through her tears. But sweetheart, happy endings aren't so simple. Not then, not ever. Because when people lose control, they look for someone to blame. And that night, someone decided to make us pay. You know, sweetheart, sometimes when the world can't silence you, it tries to break you. And that's exactly what happened next. After the dean's speech, the air on campus felt different. You could feel the shift, like the first breath after being underwater too long. Students started greeting Ava, some even apologizing quietly when no one else was watching. A few teachers stopped her in the hall to commend her strength. But not everyone changed. Hate doesn't vanish overnight. It hides, festers, and waits. That night, I still remember it like a scar that won't fade. It was a Friday, a cool breeze sweeping through Brooklyn. Ava and I had just finished dinner in the dorm cafeteria. We were both exhausted, laughing about something silly when I said, "For the first time, it feels like we're winning." Ava smiled, her dimples showing. Maybe we are. We walked back to the dorm, the campus unusually quiet. The streetlights flickered, and the smell of rain hung heavy in the air. Ava went inside her room while I stayed downstairs, sorting flyers for our next One Voice event. It must have been around midnight when I smelled the smoke. At first, I thought someone was burning trash nearby, but then screaming. Loud, panicked screaming from upstairs. I looked up and saw orange light flickering through the dorm window. Ava's room. I dropped everything and ran. People were shouting. Water sprinklers hadn't even started yet. The hallway was thick with smoke, stinging my eyes. Someone yelled, "Call the fire department!" But I wasn't listening. I just ran toward Ava's door. It was jammed. The handle was burning hot. I grabbed my scarf, wrapped it around my hand, and shoved my shoulder into the door. Once, twice, 3 times, until it burst open. Ava was inside, coughing, trying to pull her suitcase out from under her bed. Her curtains were in flames. I screamed, "Forget your things!" and rushed to her. We stumbled out together, choking and blinded by smoke. I could barely see, but I heard her coughing my name. "Claire! Claire!" When we finally got out, the fire trucks arrived, sirens slicing through the night. I held Ava's hand while the paramedics checked her lungs. She was trembling, soot covering her face. And then we saw it. Someone had painted on the wall outside her room, in black spray paint, "You don't belong here." Sweetheart, I swear my whole body went cold. That wasn't an accident. Someone had done it deliberately. Someone had tried to burn her out. The police came, took statements, asked questions. But no one confessed. No one saw anything. Rick and his friends were there too, pretending to be concerned, watching from a distance with blank faces. The college tried to hush it up, called it a possible electrical fault. But I knew, everyone knew. That night, Ava and I sat in the parking lot, wrapped in a blanket the firefighters gave us. She didn't say a word for a long time. Then quietly she said, "You see, this is what happens when you speak too loud." I said, "No, Ava. This is what happens when cowards can't stand truth." Her eyes lifted to mine, tired, angry, yet somehow still alive. "What if they try again?" I held her hand tighter. "Then they'll find out we don't burn that easily." The next morning, photos of the fire made it into the local paper. But not because of the college, because a student from One Voice had recorded it and posted it on early online forums. It spread fast. People began to ask questions. Activists called it a hate-fueled attack. Within days, news reporters were outside our college gates. They wanted to interview Ava, to hear her story. At first, she refused, said she didn't want pity. But then she saw the comments. People from all over the country sending messages of support. Students from other colleges wrote, "We stand with you." Artists drew her portrait, captioned, "The girl who wouldn't be silenced." Something changed in her that week. She stood taller. She spoke louder. And when the college finally organized a public town meeting to address the incident, Ava walked onto that stage, took the microphone, and said, "I forgive whoever tried to scare me, because I've realized they weren't trying to destroy me. They were terrified I'd remind them what humanity looks like." Sweetheart. There was silence after that, the kind that makes your skin prickle. Even Rick couldn't look her in the eye. Then Ava said something that would later go viral all over the country. Racism isn't born in people's hearts. It's planted, and it grows when we keep watering it with fear. That moment, that exact line, was recorded by one of the students and uploaded online. Within days, her words were everywhere. People shared it. Talk shows replayed it. Hashtag spread. One voice became a movement. But the fame came with more backlash. Letters of hate. Messages filled with threats. And once, someone slipped an envelope under my dorm door. A photo of Ava and me with the words, "Next time you won't be lucky." I wanted to tell her, but she already knew. She could see it in my face. She said, "They think they're scaring us, but they're only making us impossible to ignore." A few weeks later, she was invited to speak at a community event in downtown Brooklyn. A rally against discrimination. Hundreds showed up. I stood backstage, watching her step onto that platform, the wind catching her scarf, the microphone trembling slightly in her hands. She began softly, telling her story, our story, the cafeteria humiliation, the slurs, the fire. And then she said, "I'm not here to blame anyone. I'm here to say, love doesn't have a color. And if it does, maybe it's the color of courage." Sweetheart, I cried right there. The crowd clapped for minutes, people hugging, shouting her name. From that day on, Ava wasn't just my friend. She became a symbol. News channels started calling her the Brooklyn Phoenix, the girl who rose from ashes and made the world listen. But I stayed behind the curtain. You see, for every person cheering, there were still some whispering, calling me the girl who betrayed her own. I lost a scholarship offer. My own family got anonymous letters telling them their daughter was a disgrace. I'd walk through campus and hear murmurs. "She did it for attention. She's just using the black girl to look good." But I didn't care anymore. I'd already made peace with the cost, because for the first time, I understood what real friendship meant. Not the kind you make over laughter and easy days, but the kind that's tested by fire and survives. And Ava, she never forgot that. Every time she gave an interview, she'd say, "I'm here today because someone stood beside me when the world turned away." And she always meant me. It felt strange to be thanked for something that had broken me in so many ways. But I realized sometimes the hardest roads lead to the only places worth reaching. Still, the scars remained. The smell of smoke haunted me for years. The memory of that night never really left. And though justice never found the person who started the fire, the truth found something bigger. Light. Ava became a voice for thousands who had been silent for too long. And me? I learned that silence was never peace. It was just fear wearing a polite face. You know, sweetheart, decades pass, and the world changes its clothes. But the heart of it, the part that beats and breaks and loves, that stays the same. Sometimes when I sit here and see the world through your eyes, the screens, the voices, the movements, I think of her, Ava. After the rallies, after the noise, after the cameras stopped flashing, life went on. The college changed its policies. They started diversity programs, awareness sessions, and scholarships for underrepresented students. They called it the Coleman Initiative. I was proud, so proud. But Ava didn't stay. A few months after graduation, she left Brooklyn, said she wanted to travel, write, and tell stories that mattered. She wanted to be the voice for people who never got to speak. She sent me letters. Long, beautiful letters written in her looping handwriting. From Atlanta, then Chicago, then Los Angeles. She'd write about meeting families torn by hate, about children who reminded her of the girl she used to be. Every letter ended with the same line. "Keep believing, Claire, even when it hurts." And I did. Years passed. I became a teacher. Funny, isn't it? After all those years of fighting for truth, I ended up teaching it. Every time I stood in front of my students, I thought of Ava. Then one evening, this must have been around 1985, I turned on the TV and there she was, older, wiser, standing on a stage receiving an award for her journalism work. The anchor said, "Ava Coleman, the Brooklyn Phoenix, honored tonight for her lifelong dedication to social justice." Sweetheart, I remember sitting there, my cup of tea forgotten in my hand, tears running down my cheeks. She was wearing that same soft blue she used to love, and her smile, oh, it hadn't changed a bit. The applause she got, it wasn't just for her. It was for every girl who had ever been told she didn't belong. And then she said something that hit me like sunlight, breaking through clouds. Once, someone sat beside me when the world refused to. She reminded me that kindness is louder than cruelty. Wherever she is, I hope she knows she saved me. I did know. I sat there crying like a fool, whispering to the television, "I love you too, Ava." But life, sweetheart, it doesn't always give you one last moment, one final goodbye. We never met again after college. The years rolled by, and all I had were her words, her strength, her memory, and the quiet pride of knowing I'd stood on the right side of history, even when it hurt. A few years ago, I found out Ava passed away. Peacefully, they said, surrounded by family. She had children, grandchildren, students who adored her. She left behind a foundation for young journalists of color. And do you know what its motto was? Speak, even if your voice shakes. When I read that, I felt like I could hear her voice again. Soft, steady, and unafraid. And you know what's strange, sweetheart? The hate that once burned through our dorm room now lives only as a story. One that people tell to learn, not to wound. The same college that once tried to quiet us now has her portrait in the main hall. A plaque under it reads, "Ava Coleman, she taught us courage." Every time I visit, I run my hand along that brass plate, and I swear I can still feel her warmth in it. But I also remember the other side. The fear, the pain, the nights when I thought I'd made a mistake by standing beside her. Because courage doesn't come easy. It never has. It costs you comfort, safety, sometimes even people you love. But sweetheart, it gives you something greater. Peace. The peace of knowing that you did what was right, not what was easy. Sometimes when I watch you scrolling through those little videos on your phone, and I see people talking about kindness, equality, standing up for others, I smile, because I realize you're growing up in a world Ava helped build. You're living in a world where her voice still echoes. In classrooms, in hashtags, in hearts. And maybe that's how change really works. It doesn't happen all at once. It passes like a torch, from one hand to another, from one heart to another, from one girl sitting on a lonely bench to another who decides to sit beside her. You look so much like I did at your age, you know? That same fire in your eyes. And I hope, if you ever see someone being treated unfairly, no matter their color, no matter who they are, you'll remember this story. Don't turn away. Don't stay quiet. Sit beside them. Speak for them. Because kindness is not weakness, sweetheart. It's the loudest kind of strength there is. And sometimes when you speak, even if your voice shakes, the world listens. So, when people ask about my college days, I don't tell them about the bullies, the fire, or the hate. I tell them about Ava, about the girl who refused to disappear, about how she taught me that love, real, stubborn, world-changing love, is the color of courage. And when I close my eyes, I can still see us. 2 girls under those maple trees in Brooklyn, laughing like we had no idea how much we were about to change.